The ballroom glowed with golden light, filled with the scent of expensive perfume and laughter that tried too hard to sound elegant. It was one of those charity dinners where rich people showed kindness only when cameras were watching. At the center of it all sat Mr. Harrison Cole, a powerful CEO known for his money, pride, and cruel humor. He wore a black tuxedo and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name could make smaller businessmen nervous and waiters careful. Around his table sat other powerful guests, bankers, politicians, investors. They sipped champagne, laughed loudly, and spoke about people as if they were numbers. The air buzzed with ego, power, and the faint sound of a string quartet playing in the corner. In the background, servers moved quietly between tables carrying trays of wine and dishes too expensive for most to name. Among them was Amara, a young black woman in her mid-20s. Her hair was tied neatly, her uniform spotless. Her movements were calm, careful, practiced. She didn't speak much, only smiled politely when thanked. What no one knew was that Amara was more than a server. She had once been a university student studying languages abroad. But life had been unfair. Her mother's illness had forced her to quit her studies and return home, taking any job she could to pay the hospital bills. Tonight she was serving food to the kind of people who would never imagine what she had sacrificed. Amara walked gracefully between the tables, balancing her tray like a dancer balancing her breath. Every step was measured, every word polite. But as she approached the table at the center, the one that belonged to Harrison Cole, she felt the air shift. The laughter there was louder, sharper, almost like the sound of people laughing at someone not with them. Cole's deep voice carried easily over the music. "You know," he said, swirling his drink, "these events are supposed to help the poor, but half of them don't even help themselves." The men around him chuckled. If I gave every struggling person in this city a job, they'd still find a way to complain about something. A few laughed louder than others, desperate to please him. The women at the table smiled politely, though some looked uncomfortable. That's when Amara arrived, her tray full of wine glasses that sparkled under the chandelier light. Cole turned his gaze to her, eyes lazy but sharp. "Ah, here we go," he said, snapping his fingers once. "Another hard-working hero saving the world one glass of wine at a time." The table chuckled again. Amara smiled faintly and began pouring wine, pretending not to notice. But Cole wasn't done. "You know," he continued, leaning back, "I always wondered, do people like you even understand half of what's going on in this room? The conversations, the business terms, the big words." The laughter around him grew louder now. Amara's hands froze for just a moment before she placed the bottle down carefully. Her heart thudded, but her face remained calm. "I'm sure I understand enough, sir," she said politely. Her composure seemed to irritate him more than anything. He smirked, enjoying the attention of the table. "Really? Let's test that then," he said, picking up a fancy menu printed in French. He waved it in front of her with a mocking grin. "If you're so smart," he said loudly, "then translate it." The room went silent. Even the music seemed to fade. All eyes turned toward Amara. Some of the guests looked amused, others awkward. A woman at the far end of the table whispered, "Harrison, that's enough." But he ignored her. He was enjoying his power too much. Amara stood perfectly still, looking at the menu in his hand. For a second, she didn't move. Inside, she could feel her stomach twist, but she took a slow breath. She had faced harder moments than this. She had seen her mother struggle to breathe in hospital beds. She had studied through nights without food. She wasn't going to let this man's arrogance shake her. She looked up, her voice steady and soft. "Of course, sir," she said. "If you'd like, I can tell you what each dish means." Cole blinked, surprised by her calm tone. "Oh?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Go ahead, then." Amara took the menu gently from his hand, her eyes moving over the elegant French text. Then in perfect pronunciation, she began to translate. Line by line, dish by dish, she explained everything. The flavors, the ingredients, even the regions of origin. Her French flowed smoothly like music, confident and pure. The room that had once laughed at her was now silent. One of the guests whispered, "She's fluent?" Another gasped softly when Amara corrected a small typo on the menu, explaining that the word Vera was misspelled. By the time she finished, you could have heard a pin drop. Amara placed the menu gently back on the table, her expression unchanged. "Is that correct, sir?" she asked. Cole's jaw tightened. His face was red, not from alcohol now, but embarrassment. The same man who moments ago had laughed the loudest now couldn't meet her eyes. A man at the next table whispered, "Impressive," under his breath. Amara gave a small nod and continued serving the next guest as if nothing had happened. She didn't need applause. She didn't need revenge. Her calmness had already done more damage than anger ever could. Across the room, the music began again, but the tone at Cole's table had changed. No one laughed now. Some stared at their plates, others at their phones, pretending to be busy. But Amara, quiet, graceful, unshaken, moved on to the next table, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than gold. And for the first time that night, Harrison Cole, a man who had always seen himself above others, realized that intelligence had no uniform, no price tag, and no color. He had wanted to humiliate her, but instead he had exposed himself. The night continued, but the balance of power in that golden ballroom had quietly shifted. And though no one would admit it, everyone who witnessed that moment would remember the calm voice of a black woman who proved that true class doesn't shout. It simply speaks. The room still shimmered with gold and glass, but something in the air had changed. The moment Amara walked away, whispers began to crawl across the tables. Guests spoke in low voices, unsure whether to laugh again or pretend nothing had happened. But Mr. Harrison Cole, the CEO at the center of it all, sat still, clutching his wine glass a little too tightly. His smirk had faded, replaced by the stiff, empty smile of a man who'd just been caught being smaller than he imagined himself to be. Yet, his pride wouldn't let him stop there. He leaned back in his chair, pretending to be amused. "She must have memorized that," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "People like that always have tricks." A few of the guests chuckled awkwardly, the kind of laughter born from fear, not humor. No one wanted to disagree with a man who signed million-dollar contracts with a single call. At the edge of the ballroom, Amara stood behind a silver cart, quietly refilling water glasses, her face unreadable. She could feel eyes on her, the same eyes that had mocked her moments ago. Some looked embarrassed now, others curious. She didn't look back. Inside her, the sting of humiliation had melted into something else. Resolve. The manager of the hotel, Mr. Peterson, approached her nervously. "Amara," he whispered, glancing toward the CEO's table. "Maybe stay away from that side for now. You know how powerful people can be." Amara looked up, her expression calm but firm. "With respect, sir," she said softly, "I didn't do anything wrong." Peterson sighed. "I know, but he's not the type who likes being corrected. Just keep your head down tonight, all right?" She nodded once, then continued her work, steady and graceful. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't over. People like Harrison Cole didn't just let things go. Back at his table, Cole's pride itched like a burn that wouldn't heal. He poured himself another glass of wine and said loudly, "I guess they're hiring scholars for waitresses now." His voice carried across the room. The attempt at humor sounded sharp, bitter. One of his guests, a woman in a silver dress, frowned. "Harrison," she said gently, "maybe you should let it go. She was just doing her job." But Cole wasn't listening. He turned his irritation into cruelty, the only way his ego knew how to breathe. "Doing her job?" He scoffed. "If she's so educated, what's she doing serving drinks at tables like this?" The words sliced through the air, and even those trying to pretend they hadn't heard froze for a moment. At the far end of the hall, Amara caught the sentence. Her hand tightened around the tray she was carrying, but she didn't stop. She had learned long ago that silence was not weakness. It was strength waiting for the right moment. Cole noticed her moving toward another table and called out, his voice booming across the hall. "Hey, scholar!" Everyone turned again. Amara stopped mid-step and faced him slowly. Her expression was still calm, but her eyes carried a quiet steel. "Yes, sir?" she said. Cole grinned, leaning forward. "Tell me something," he said. "You know all these fancy words. How about you tell me what a woman like you's doing here instead of sitting in some fancy office?" There was laughter from a few corners, forced and uncomfortable. But before Amara could answer, a man from another table spoke up. It was Mr. Leonard, an older entrepreneur who had been silent all evening. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the kind of weight that came from wisdom, not money. "Maybe she's working here," Leonard said, "because she values honesty more than privilege." The laughter stopped. Cole's smile cracked. The older man continued, I've seen a lot of people in this room tonight, Mr. Cole. People who talk about intelligence but can't tell the difference between arrogance and confidence. That young lady just reminded us all of it. Murmurs spread again, but this time they weren't in the CEO's favor. Cole tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. Amara gave a polite nod toward Leonard. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. Then she turned back to Cole. Her voice was soft but carried a clarity that sliced through the noise. "And to answer your question, sir, I'm here because I don't let pride decide where I belong. I work hard for what I have. That's something no title can buy." The hall went silent again. The chandeliers above seemed to glow brighter, as if listening too. For the first time that night, Harrison Cole didn't have a reply. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Around him, his guests shifted uncomfortably. The man who had spent his life talking over others had finally met someone who didn't need to raise her voice to silence him. Amara gave a respectful nod and turned away, continuing her work as if nothing had happened. But inside her, something had changed. For years she had swallowed words, endured sneers, and bowed to arrogance. Tonight, for the first time, she had spoken, not in anger but in truth. And while she returned to her duties, the whispers in the hall had changed their tone. They no longer laughed at her, they admired her. Somewhere deep inside, even Harrison Cole felt something foreign and sharp twist in his chest. Shame. He stared at his reflection in his half-empty wineglass. Seeing a version of himself he didn't recognize, a man made small by his own arrogance. And as the music started again, he realized that for all his power, he had never been the most important person in the room. The one who truly owned it was the woman who had just reminded him what dignity looked like. The night stretched on, but the air in that grand ballroom had lost its warmth. The music still played, the glasses still clinked, and waiters still glided between tables, but something unseen had shifted. Mr. Harrison Cole, the CEO who once dominated every room he entered, now sat quieter than usual. His laughter, once booming, came out strained. His mind kept circling back to that moment, the soft-spoken waitress who had humbled him without even trying. He told himself it didn't matter. He was rich, respected, feared. She was just a server in a black apron, and yet every time he tried to forget her calm eyes and flawless French, the memory burned sharper. Pride is heavy, it doesn't let go easily. So he decided to make himself feel powerful again, the only way he knew how. When dessert was served, he waved Amara over with a lazy flick of his fingers. "You," he said, not even using her name, "bring me another glass of wine. The expensive one, not the cheap stuff you usually serve." Amara turned to him, still composed. "Of course, sir." She moved toward the bar, graceful as ever, while the guests exchanged awkward glances. Some of them pitied her. Others pitied him. Everyone could feel it, the strange tension between arrogance and calmness that had filled the room. When she returned with the wine, Cole smirked. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I looked you up. Asked around about you. Seems you studied languages, right? Paris, was it?" Amara nodded politely. "Yes, sir." He leaned back, his tone laced with mock curiosity. "And yet here you are, serving drinks. Tell me, did you get tired of being smart?" The laughter that followed was softer this time, hesitant. People were afraid to join in, unsure of what might happen next. But Amara didn't flinch. She set the glass gently in front of him and looked him straight in the eye. "No, sir," she said evenly. "I just chose to be useful. Intelligence doesn't disappear when life gets hard. It waits." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Cole blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to answer, let alone with grace. Before he could recover, one of his guests, a journalist who had been silent most of the evening, spoke up. "She's right, Harrison," he said. "You talk about power as if it's something you own, but maybe power is just how people handle being powerless." The table went silent. A few eyes turned to Cole, waiting for his reaction. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For a man who always had the last word, silence was a new and bitter taste. Amara, sensing the discomfort, gave a polite bow and moved on. But before she walked away, she paused. "For what it's worth, sir," she said quietly, "I didn't study languages to impress anyone. I studied them because understanding people is better than commanding them." She turned and disappeared into the crowd of servers, her soft footsteps fading beneath the music. At the table, Cole stared at her retreating figure, speechless. Around him, his guests avoided his gaze. The woman in the silver dress whispered, "You should apologize, Harrison." He scoffed. Apologize? To a waitress? But even as he said it, his voice lacked its usual confidence. Moments later, a man approached the table. It was Mr. Leonard, the older entrepreneur from earlier, the one who had defended Amara. He placed a hand on Cole's shoulder. "You know, son," Leonard said, his voice low but firm, "people remember two things about you: how you treat those above you and how you treat those below. You've done well with the first." Cole's face hardened, but he didn't reply. The older man simply gave him a knowing look and walked away. Minutes later, the room erupted in polite applause as a speaker took the stage to thank the guests for their donations. The crowd clapped, smiled, and returned to their shallow conversations. But at Harrison Cole's table, the mood had soured. He sat still, lost in his thoughts, the echo of Leonard's words mixing with Amara's quiet dignity. Across the hall, Amara continued working with effortless grace, helping clear plates, refilling glasses, never once looking toward the CEO's table. To anyone watching, she seemed unbothered, focused on her job. But inside, she carried a quiet fire, a mix of pride and pain. People like Cole had tried to make her small before, but she had learned long ago that dignity didn't need permission. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, Cole found himself alone near the bar. He poured another drink, his reflection staring back at him through the glass. For the first time, he didn't like the man he saw. The arrogance, the superiority. It all looked hollow now. Behind him, Amara walked past, carrying a tray of empty glasses. She didn't glance his way, didn't stop, didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any insult. And as she disappeared once again through the double doors leading to the kitchen, Harrison Cole realized something he had never understood before. There are people you can't buy, can't intimidate, can't belittle. They don't need wealth or fame. They only need truth. And tonight, he'd been forced to look straight into it, and it had worn the face of the woman he'd tried to humiliate. The night had ended, but the echo of that dinner didn't die with it. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the sleek marble floors of Cole Industries headquarters, where Harrison Cole sat alone in his corner office. The skyline of the city stretched beyond the glass, cold and endless, just like the silence that surrounded him. His phone buzzed with messages from the night before, colleagues, reporters, and even friends sending links to a video that was spreading faster than wildfire. It had been recorded quietly, perhaps by someone at a nearby table. The title read, "Arrogant CEO Mocked a Black Server." Her response left everyone speechless. Cole clicked on it almost against his will. The video opened with him waving the French menu, his mocking grin lit by the chandeliers. He watched himself sneer, laugh, and speak words that now sounded uglier than he remembered. And then he saw her, Amara, standing tall, translating each word with calm dignity. The crowd in the video went silent. Even on screen, the shame was heavy. By the end of it, the comments were already pouring in. "She's incredible. Humility is free. He should try it." That CEO just learned class from a waitress. Cole's stomach turned. The same world that had once cheered for him was now tearing him apart. He closed the laptop, pressing his fingers against his temples. Pride had built his empire, but now that same pride was turning into poison. He called his assistant Clara, who entered quietly, holding her tablet. "Sir," she said cautiously, "it's everywhere. The board's been calling all morning. The investors are nervous. They think this could affect our image." "Our image?" he snapped. "It's one dinner. People forget these things." Clara hesitated. "Not this time, sir." She didn't shout or argue. "That's why it's spreading, because she made you look small by staying calm." Cole's eyes darkened. He stood and walked to the window. "Get me her name," he said flatly. "The server. Find out everything about her." Clara hesitated again. "Sir, I don't think that's wise. Just do it," he said sharply. An hour later, she returned with a file. "Her name's Amara Williams," she said. "She's 26. Studied linguistics at the University of Paris. Fluent in French, Spanish, Italian, and Swahili. Had to leave school when her mother got sick. She works at the hotel part-time to pay for treatment." For the first time, Cole didn't have a comeback. The words hit harder than he expected. "So she really is what she said she was," he muttered. Clara nodded. "And she's actually received a lot of support. People are donating to her online. Some language schools want to offer her a teaching position. Cole sat down heavily. The arrogance that had carried him all his life suddenly felt like a burden pressing down on his shoulders. He wasn't angry at her anymore, he was angry at himself. "Schedule a meeting," he said after a long silence. "Sir?" "With her," he said quietly. "I owe her that much." Clara looked surprised but nodded. "I'll reach out to the hotel." That evening, Amara received a call while she was leaving work. The hotel manager told her the CEO of Cole Industries wanted to meet. Her first reaction was suspicion. "I'm not interested in revenge or apology speeches," she said. "It's not about that," the manager replied. He sounded different. The next morning, she arrived at his office. It was everything she expected, modern, sharp, intimidating. Cole stood as she entered. Gone was the proud grin. His suit was neat, but his expression was uneasy, his posture heavy. "Miss Williams," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." She didn't sit right away. "I wasn't sure if I should," she replied. "After all, people like me don't usually get invited to offices like this." He winced at her words. "You're right," he said. "And that's exactly why I asked you here." He gestured to the chair. She sat slowly, still cautious. He took a deep breath. "I've spent my whole life thinking intelligence was something you could measure in money, titles, or rooms like this. You proved me wrong in 10 seconds. Amara watched him quietly, saying nothing. "I humiliated you," he continued, his voice low, "in front of a room full of people. And somehow you taught me more about strength than anyone ever has. I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right." Amara finally spoke. "You don't need to make it right, Mr. Cole. You need to make it matter." He looked up, confused. "Matter?" She nodded. "People will forget your mistake, but they'll remember how you handled it. You can't erase arrogance, but you can use your platform to build something better." Her words landed like a quiet storm. For the first time in years, Harrison Cole didn't feel like the smartest person in the room, and it humbled him. "I want to help," he said finally. "Tell me what I can do." Amara stood up, picking up her bag. "You already know," she said softly. "You just haven't been listening." And as she turned to leave, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Respect. Not the kind that came from power or money, but the kind that was earned when you looked into the eyes of someone who had every reason to hate you, and didn't. When the door closed behind her, Harrison Cole looked out the window again. The city lights shimmered below like tiny fires, and for the first time, he understood that power didn't come from being above others. It came from knowing when to stand equal. 2 days passed, but the story refused to die. Every headline, every social feed, every talk show seemed to repeat the same words. The CEO who mocked the server. Harrison Cole had been in scandals before, but never one like this. This wasn't about money, corruption, or business. This was about character, and it was personal. He had spent those 2 days avoiding the public, hiding behind the tinted windows of his penthouse office. Yet no matter how high up he sat, the world's judgment had reached him. The arrogant mask he'd worn his entire life was cracking. On the morning of the 3rd day, his assistant Clara entered quietly. "Sir," she said, "there's been a development. The video's reached 2 million views. It's everywhere now." But she hesitated. "People are calling Amara a role model. She's been invited to speak at an education event this weekend." Harrison looked up slowly. "She's speaking?" Clara nodded. "At the International Language Forum. She'll be representing cultural understanding. They quoted her in the promotion post." She turned her tablet around to show him the line printed beneath Amara's photo. "Understanding people is better than commanding them." Harrison stared at the words for a long time. They were the same words she had spoken to him that night, the ones that had cut through his pride like a blade of light. He leaned back in his chair, sighing. "She turned my humiliation into a message," Clara replied gently. "Maybe it was never about you, sir." That afternoon, he made a decision that shocked his board of directors. He walked into the meeting room, where his executives were arguing about damage control, press releases, PR spins, and social campaigns. He raised a hand, silencing them. "No more statements," he said firmly. "No more excuses. We don't need to fix our image. We need to fix our culture." The room went silent. One of the executives, a stern man in glasses, frowned. "With respect, sir, this isn't about company policy. It's about you." Harrison nodded. "Exactly. And that's why I'm going to change it, starting with myself. He left the room before anyone could argue. Hours later, he arrived at the education forum where Amara was speaking. The event was crowded. Teachers, students, reporters, and community leaders all gathered to hear her talk about language and respect. She stood on stage in a simple navy dress, no makeup, no jewelry, her voice clear and confident as she spoke about communication, empathy, and dignity. "The world doesn't need more people shouting to be heard," she said to the audience. "It needs people willing to listen even when they're wrong." From the back of the hall, Harrison listened quietly. Each word struck him like a truth he had avoided his whole life. She wasn't speaking with anger. There was no bitterness, just truth, gentle, powerful, undeniable. When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause. Reporters crowded around her, flashing cameras, microphones raised. Harrison stayed back, watching for a long moment before finally walking forward. The crowd began to part when they noticed him. The once arrogant CEO now walking toward the woman who had humbled him in front of the world. Amara noticed him too. For a moment their eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't frown, she simply waited. He stopped in front of her, his voice calm and steady. "Miss Williams," he said softly, "I came to listen." The crowd went silent again, phones recording every second. He continued, "You taught me something I should have known years ago. That respect doesn't come from power, but from how we treat people when no one's watching." He turned to the audience. "I humiliated someone who had more grace and intelligence than I'll ever have. And for that, I am sorry. Not because of what it cost me, but because of what it revealed about me." The hall filled with murmurs, flashes of cameras, and a strange, heavy silence that soon turned into applause. Not because the world suddenly forgave him, but because they could see something rare. A man finally learning humility. When the crowd cleared, Harrison approached Amara privately. "If you'll let me," he said, "I want to fund something. Not as an apology, but as a promise. A foundation for students who lost opportunities like you did. I'd like to call it the Amara Initiative." Amara's eyes softened. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to. You gave me a second chance to be human again. The least I can do is give others their first." For the first time, she smiled. Not as a server, not as a victim, but as a teacher. "Then make sure it's never about money," she said quietly. "Make it about change." He nodded, his voice low. "Always." That night, as the headlines exploded again, the story had a new ending. The CEO returns, but this time, to learn. And in the quiet of his penthouse later that evening, Harrison looked out at the city lights below and whispered the words that had started it all. "If you're so smart, then translate it." Then he smiled softly and added, "Turns out she translated me." The weeks that followed were unlike anything either of them expected. What had begun as humiliation in a glittering ballroom had transformed into something far greater, a conversation that refused to fade. The media called it the lesson of dignity. Universities invited Amara Williams to speak about empathy and resilience, while corporate networks praised Harrison Cole for his public apology and reform efforts. But to both of them, it was never about fame. It was about truth. Harrison's company, Cole Industries, was changing fast. The once cutthroat culture of competition was being replaced by something new, understanding. He introduced a policy called the Respect Initiative, inspired directly by Amara's story. Every new hire, from executives to janitors, had to attend workshops focused on communication, equality, and humility. But even with the praise, Harrison knew something deeper was missing: personal redemption. He had apologized publicly, yes, but the guilt still sat heavy inside him like a stone that refused to move. One cold morning, as the city shimmered beneath a blanket of fog, he made a quiet decision. He took off his suit, slipped into plain clothes, and walked through the back entrance of the same hotel where it had all begun. The staff stared in surprise. The manager hurried over. "Mr. Cole, this is unexpected." "I'm not here as a CEO," Harrison said softly. "I'm here as a man who once forgot how to respect others. I'd like to volunteer here for a week, serve, clean, whatever you need." The manager blinked, unsure if he was serious. "You want to be part of the staff?" "Yes," Harrison replied. "It's time I understand the view from the other side of the table." By that afternoon, the most powerful man in the city was tying an apron around his waist, carrying trays and taking orders. The staff watched in disbelief. Some whispered, some smiled, but no one mocked him. They could see sincerity in his every movement. Hours later, as Harrison balanced a tray of drinks, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "I didn't think I'd ever see you here again," Amara said gently. He turned, startled, to see her standing at the end of the hallway holding her own tray. She wasn't in her uniform anymore. She now worked as a training consultant for the hotel, helping new employees communicate and grow. The very place that had once been a stage for her humiliation was now the foundation of her rise. "I guess I owed this place something," he said with a faint smile. She looked at him for a long moment before asking softly, "Are you here for forgiveness?" He shook his head. "No, I'm here to earn understanding." Amara nodded. "Then start by listening." For the next hour, she walked him through the kitchens, the service halls, and the staff lounge, the places most guests never saw. She introduced him to the people who worked double shifts, who smiled through exhaustion, who carried the invisible weight of making others comfortable. Harrison listened, really listened, for the first time in years. Every story humbled him further. Later, as they stood outside the kitchen door, Amara said quietly, "Do you know why I never yelled at you that night?" He looked down. "Because you had more grace than I deserved?" She smiled slightly. "Because anger makes people defensive." "But silence? Silence makes them think. You can't argue with silence." He met her gaze, finally understanding what she meant. "You didn't just translate words that night," he said slowly. "You translated humanity." Amara chuckled softly. "Maybe you were finally ready to read it." The next day, a photograph surfaced online, not of the proud CEO in a suit, but of him in a simple apron, serving coffee to an elderly guest. The caption read, "When the powerful learn to serve, respect becomes real." The image went viral overnight, but this time there were no cruel comments, no mockery, just admiration. People called it the full circle moment. By the end of the week, Harrison had gained something no money could buy: perspective. The staff no longer saw him as the arrogant man from before. They saw a man trying to change. Before he left the hotel, he found Amara one last time. "You were right," he said quietly. "Respect can't be taught in a classroom. It has to be lived." Amara smiled. "Then keep living it, Mr. Cole. The world doesn't need perfect men. It needs men who learn." That evening, as he walked out of the hotel under a silver blue sky, the city lights flickered like a million tiny eyes watching him. But for once he didn't feel judged. He felt human. He whispered to himself, "She served me lessons I didn't know I was hungry for." And from that moment on, Harrison Cole never stopped serving. Not food, not pride, but respect. Months passed and the world slowly moved on. But the story of that dinner never truly faded. It became something greater than a viral clip or a trending headline. It became a quiet reminder that dignity, once shown, can echo louder than any scandal. For Harrison Cole, life had changed completely. The man who once lived for applause now lived for peace. His mornings no longer began with phone calls and deals, but with long walks through the city. The same city that had once mocked him, but now nodded respectfully as he passed. People didn't see him as a powerful CEO anymore. They saw a man who had faced his own reflection and decided to rebuild it. The Amara initiative, which began as a promise, had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Dozens of schools now taught underprivileged children foreign languages, funded by Cole Industries. Every scholarship bore Amara's name, and every classroom carried her motto written in gold letters on the wall. Understanding people is better than commanding them. And yet the most powerful moment of all was the one that no camera captured. One quiet evening, Harrison found himself standing outside the hospital where Amara's mother was recovering. He had come unannounced, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite. When Amara opened the door to the hospital room, surprise flashed across her face. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. I know, Harrison replied. But sometimes, gratitude means showing up, not saying it. Amara stepped aside, letting him in. Her mother, frail but smiling, looked up from her bed. You must be the man who caused all that noise on the internet, she joked gently. Harrison chuckled. Guilty, he said, setting the flowers beside her. But I'm trying to make the right kind of noise now. Her mother nodded, her eyes kind. My daughter told me everything. You embarrassed her once, but you honored her forever. That's rare. For a moment, the three of them sat together in silence. The air was warm, soft, filled with quiet forgiveness, the kind that heals deeper than words ever could. When Harrison left that evening, the sun was setting in shades of red and gold. As he stood outside the hospital, a group of children passed by, wearing shirts printed with Amara's quote. One little boy tugged his sleeve and asked, Mister, are you the man from the story? Harrison smiled. Yes, he said, but she's the hero, not me. The boy grinned. She taught you to be nice, huh? Harrison laughed. Something like that. That night, as he returned home, he didn't turn on his phone or open his laptop. He simply sat by the window, looking at the lights below. For the first time in years, he felt light, truly light, as if the weight of all his pride had finally fallen away. The next morning, an article appeared in a major newspaper. It wasn't about the scandal anymore. It was about change. The headline read, From Power to Purpose, How One CEO Learned the Language of Respect. Inside, the journalist had written, True leadership isn't about commanding people. It's about listening to them. And sometimes, the greatest teacher in your life will be the person you once overlooked. Meanwhile, Amara continued to travel across schools and companies, giving talks on empathy, education, and courage. But she never spoke about herself as a victim. That story, she told audiences, wasn't about revenge. It was about awakening. One evening, months later, she received a letter written in neat handwriting. It was from Harrison. You once told me silence makes people think. I still think about that every day. Thank you for changing my language. Not the one I speak, but the one I live. Amara smiled when she read it and tucked it away in her journal, next to the French menu she had once translated in that golden ballroom, the same one that had started it all. Years later, when people looked back on the event, they no longer remembered the laughter or the arrogance. They remembered a young woman who answered cruelty with calm and a man who turned shame into strength. And somewhere in that timeless lesson, the world learned a truth that would never grow old, that education without empathy is empty, and respect once earned speaks every language on earth. It was no longer just a story about a CEO and a server. It was a story about humanity rediscovering its voice, and the two people who helped it speak again.